Velociraptor was not what Jurassic Park told you. That sentence sounds like an attack on a movie, but it should not be. Jurassic Park changed the way millions of people imagine dinosaurs. It made them fast, tense, intelligent, frightening, and alive in a way that older dinosaur movies often did not. The raptors in those films are some of the most effective movie creatures ever created. They stalk through kitchens, open doors, move with purpose, and turn a scientific name into a global pop culture icon. But the real Velociraptor was not that animal. The real Velociraptor was much smaller. It was feathered. It lived in late Cretaceous Central Asia, not in the North American landscapes that people often imagine from the movie version. It was a dromaeosaurid, a close relative of birds, with a long stiff tail, a narrow skull, sharp teeth, clawed hands, and the famous sickle-shaped claw on the second toe. It was a predator, but not a human-sized movie monster. If you met one in a documentary reconstruction, the first shock would not be how huge it was. The first shock would be how bird-like it looked. That is where the real story begins, because the point is not simply that Hollywood got it wrong. That would be too easy and honestly too boring. Films simplify, films exaggerate, films create icons. Jurassic Park did not set out to be a museum label. It was a science fiction thriller, and it built one of the most memorable dinosaur images in modern culture. The more interesting question is why that image became so powerful, why it replaced the real animal in public imagination, and why the actual velociraptor is far stranger than the stripped-down phrase turkey-sized raptor makes it sound. A real velociraptor was not a joke version of the movie animal. It was not a harmless feathered chicken with teeth. It was a small, specialized predator adapted to its own world. It had a body plan that makes much more sense when you stop comparing it to a film monster and start comparing it to other dromaeosaurs, birds of prey, desert predators, and the animals of the Cretaceous Gobi. It was not the biggest raptor. It was not the most cinematic raptor. But it was real, and reality gives it a different kind of power. To understand why the public velociraptor and the scientific velociraptor drifted so far apart, we have to begin with size. The raptors in Jurassic Park are tall enough to look a human in the face. They fill doorways. They threaten adults at eye level. Their skulls are large, their bodies muscular, their limbs built for visual menace. Real Velociraptor was not built on that scale. Adult velociraptors were roughly around 2 meters long from snout to tail, but most of that length was tail. At the hip, the animal was low. In body mass, it was closer to a large turkey or small wolf-sized predator than to the oversized creatures that became famous on screen. It was dangerous in the way a clawed, toothy, fast-moving predator can be dangerous, but it was not the man-sized hunter most audiences picture. That difference matters because scale changes everything. A large movie raptor can throw itself at a human and dominate the frame like a monster. A real velociraptor would have occupied the world differently. It would have moved closer to the ground. Its head would have been lower. Its tail would have stretched behind it like a balancing rod. Its arms would not have been scaly dangling props. They would have carried feathers. Its body would have looked less like a naked reptilian wolf and more like a strange predatory bird that never took flight. That is not less interesting. It is more interesting. The movie creature terrifies us because it feels like an intelligent slasher villain in dinosaur form. The real velociraptor fascinates us because it blurs categories. It is a dinosaur, but it belongs close to the evolutionary line that leads toward birds. It is a predator, but not a giant apex predator towering over the ecosystem. It has teeth and claws, but also feathers. It has a reptilian skull, but a bird-like body plan. It forces us to see dinosaurs not as generic scaly monsters, but as a diverse evolutionary world where some animals were far closer to birds than old movie imagery ever suggested. The second big misunderstanding is the name. The raptors in Jurassic Park were called Velociraptor, but their body design was much closer to Deinonychus, a larger North American dromaeosaur described by John Ostrom in the 1960s. Deinonychus was one of the animals that helped launch the dinosaur renaissance, the shift in scientific thinking that moved dinosaurs away from the old image of slow, tail-dragging reptiles and toward a vision of active, dynamic, bird-like animals. Michael Crichton, writing the novel, was influenced by that science. The name Velociraptor sounded sharper, more dramatic, and easier to sell to the imagination. So, the cinematic raptor became, in a sense, Deinonychus wearing Velociraptor's name tag. This is not just trivia. It explains why the movie animal looks so different. If you imagine a larger dromaeosaur, scaled up for tension, simplified for visual clarity, stripped of feathers because early 1990s popular dinosaur imagery had not yet caught up with later discoveries, and given a dramatic name, you get the Jurassic Park raptor. It is not a random error. It is a fossil idea filtered through taxonomy, storytelling, special effects, and audience expectations. That is why the myth is so sticky. People do not remember the real Velociraptor because the movie version was bigger, scarier, and perfectly designed for suspense. It was also easier to read visually. Feathers complicate a monster silhouette. A smaller animal complicates the threat. A scientifically cautious predator with uncertain social behavior is less immediately cinematic than a pack of coordinated reptilian assassins. The film did what films do. It condensed the idea of a raptor into the most frightening version that would work on screen. But science kept moving. The most important change in public understanding came from feathers. For years, paleontologists already suspected that dromaeosaurs, including Velociraptor, were feathered because of their evolutionary relationships and the discoveries of feathered relatives. Then direct evidence made the case even stronger. A Velociraptor forearm fossil showed quill knobs, the attachment points where large feathers anchored a bone in many modern birds. That discovery made it very difficult to defend the old featherless image. Velociraptor was not just possibly fuzzy. It had evidence for substantial feathers on the arms. This is one of the places where people sometimes misunderstand what feathers mean. Feathers do not automatically mean flight. Ostriches have feathers. Penguins have feathers. Many birds use feathers for display, insulation, balance, brooding, communication, or streamlining, not just flight. Velociraptor was not flying over the dunes like a hawk. Its forelimbs were too small relative to its body for powered flight, and its anatomy does not suggest a flying lifestyle. But feathers still mattered. They changed how the animal looked, how it kept warm, how it may have displayed to others, and how we understand its evolutionary place. A feathered velociraptor is not a ruined monster. It is a better dinosaur. It tells us that the boundary between dinosaur and bird is not a clean wall. It is a gradient. Velociraptor was part of a lineage where feathers were already deeply embedded. When we imagine it with feathers, we are not adding decoration. We are restoring a major part of its biology. The old scaly raptor is familiar because of film. The feathered raptor is more scientifically honest. The body posture also changes the mood. The movie raptors often hold their hands in a way that resembles pronated wrists, palms facing downward like a human pushing on a table. Real dromaeosaurs could not rotate their wrists that way. Their hands would have faced more inward, like clapping hands, a posture that makes them look even more bird-like. Their tails were stiffened by bony rods and tendons, not floppy reptilian ropes. Their bodies were held horizontally, balanced over the hips. If you strip away the movie monster posture and rebuild the animal from anatomy, you get something lower, lighter, more precise, and more alien in the natural history sense. Then there is the famous claw. The sickle claw on Velociraptor's second toe is one of the most iconic features in dinosaur science. In older popular imagination, that claw was often treated like a disemboweling blade, something the animal used to slash open prey in one dramatic kick. That image is vivid, but it may not be the best interpretation. Modern discussions of dromaeosaur predation often lean more toward prey restraint, gripping, puncturing, and pinning. The claw may have helped the animal hold on to struggling prey, somewhat like the talons of modern birds of prey, rather than acting like a knife in a movie fight. The famous fighting dinosaurs fossil from Mongolia gives us one of the most dramatic glimpses of velociraptor behavior. It preserves a velociraptor and a protoceratops locked together, apparently caught in combat before burial. The velociraptor's claw is near the body of the protoceratops, while the protoceratops is biting the velociraptor's arm. It is one of those rare fossils that feels almost like a paused event. It does not show a pack hunt. It does not show a movie-style ambush. It shows a real predator-prey or combat interaction between two animals in the late Cretaceous Gobi. That fossil is a gift, but it is also a warning. One fossilized struggle does not tell us every habit of a species. It tells us Velociraptor interacted violently with Protoceratops-sized prey or rivals. It suggests the sickle claw could be used in close contact. It shows a world where small predators and herbivores could become locked in deadly conflict. But it does not tell us that velociraptors hunted in coordinated packs. It does not tell us they spoke to each other like movie villains. It does not tell us they planned ambushes with human-like strategy. Pack hunting is one of the biggest Jurassic Park myths. The movie raptors are terrifying because they cooperate. They test fences. They distract. They flank. They behave almost like wolves with reptile skin and problem-solving intelligence. Real Velociraptor may have interacted with others of its species, and many animals show complex social behavior in ways fossils rarely preserve. But strong evidence for coordinated Velociraptor pack hunting is lacking. Paleontologists must be careful here. Absence of evidence is not proof that it never happened, but the film version should not be treated as established science. This is where myth-busting needs to be responsible. It would be easy to swing too far in the opposite direction and say Velociraptor was definitely solitary, definitely unintelligent, definitely incapable of any interesting behavior. That would also go beyond the evidence. Behavior is hard to fossilize. We can infer from anatomy, trackways, bone beds, tooth marks, modern animal comparisons, and rare fossil moments like the fighting dinosaurs, but we almost never get direct behavioral footage. The careful statement is that there is no solid evidence for the highly coordinated pack-hunting behavior made famous by Jurassic Park. The real animal may have been social in some ways, but the movie version is storytelling, not proof. What did it actually hunt? Velociraptor lived in late Cretaceous environments of what is now Mongolia and nearby regions. The Jadakhsha Formation, famous for many Velociraptor fossils, represents arid to semi-arid environments with dunes and intermittent water sources rather than a lush, tropical jungle. This alone changes the picture. The movie raptor feels like a creature of wet foliage and steel corridors. The real animal belonged to desert-like landscapes where sand, wind, nests, eggs, small mammals, lizards, and herbivorous dinosaurs shaped the ecosystem. Its prey could have included smaller animals, juveniles, reptiles, mammals, and possibly larger prey under the right circumstances. The fighting dinosaurs fossil shows interaction with Protoceratops, an animal heavier and more powerfully built than Velociraptor. That does not mean Velociraptor routinely killed adult Protoceratops alone, but it shows that contact happened. It might have scavenged when it could. Most predators do. It may have hunted opportunistically. A realistic predator is rarely locked into one dramatic mode. It takes what its body, environment, and opportunity allow. This is another way the real animal becomes more interesting than the movie version. Movie raptors are built around suspense behavior. Real Velociraptor was built around survival. It had to find food, avoid injury, compete, mate, nest, grow, molt feathers, endure climate, and live among other animals. It was not always attacking. No predator is. Much of its life would have been ordinary in the biological sense, moving, resting, watching, grooming, searching, reacting, and sometimes striking. Natural history is often less dramatic moment by moment, but deeper when you understand that every feature is part of a living system. Feathers, for example, raise questions beyond appearance. Did Velociraptor display with its arms? Did feathers help insulate it during cool desert nights? Did adults brood nests in bird-like postures? Did colors or patterns play a role in communication? We do not know the exact color of Velociraptor. Any reconstruction that gives it stripes, bands, earthy tones, or bright display patches is making an informed artistic choice, not reporting a known photograph. But the feather evidence makes it reasonable to imagine that visual display mattered more than older scaly reconstructions suggested. This is where science and art meet. A good modern Velociraptor reconstruction must balance evidence and humility. It should show feathers because evidence supports them. It should show the animal small because fossils tell us its scale. It should not give it human-sized proportions. It should not put pronated hands on it. It should not treat pack hunting as fact. It can show alertness, predation, claws, and danger, but it should not turn the animal into a monster just because the public expects one. The irony is that a scientifically accurate velociraptor may feel less familiar but more eerie. A low, feathered predator moving through a Cretaceous desert is not a joke. It has a long snout, sharp teeth, a balancing tail, clawed hands, and a raised sickle claw that could grip into prey. Its feathers make it look closer to birds, but birds themselves can be fierce, precise, and predatory. Anyone who has watched a hawk hit prey, a secretary bird kick, or a cassowary move with prehistoric confidence knows that bird-like does not mean harmless. The real Velociraptor was not a giant monster. It was a compact predator with a body plan tied to one of the most successful evolutionary stories on Earth, the dinosaur-bird connection. That connection is one of the reasons Velociraptor matters. For much of popular culture, dinosaurs were treated as extinct reptiles, cut off from the living world. Feathered dinosaurs broke that wall. They showed that some dinosaurs did not simply vanish into the past. One branch survived as birds. Dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor sit close enough to that bird line that they help the public understand evolution not as a ladder, but as a branching tree. Birds are not like dinosaurs in a vague metaphorical way. Birds are living dinosaurs. Velociraptor was not a bird, but it was part of the broader theropod story that makes that statement possible. This makes the Jurassic Park raptor fascinating in a historical sense. When the original film came out, it was in some ways ahead of older public dinosaur imagery. Its dinosaurs were active. They were alert. They did not drag their tails. They moved with speed and intention. That was closer to the dinosaur renaissance than many previous movie dinosaurs had been. At the same time, the film was already locked into a pre-feather visual language. It gave the public dynamic dinosaurs, but not fully modern feathered raptors. That combination was powerful. It corrected one old myth while creating a new one. That is why we do not need to mock Jurassic Park. The film did something extraordinary for public paleontology. It made people curious. It made dinosaurs feel alive. It gave paleontologists a generation of students who grew up wanting to know more. The problem is not that Jurassic Park existed. The problem is when the movie image becomes so dominant that people stop updating their mental picture as science changes. The movie raptor belongs to film history. The real Velociraptor belongs to natural history. We can enjoy one and still learn the other. A good myth-busting documentary should not say, "The movie lied, therefore the movie is worthless." It should say, "The movie created an icon, and now science lets us go deeper." Because the real story has its own dramatic shape. Imagine the old public image, a scaly 6-foot-tall killer in a kitchen. Now shrink it, lower it, cover it in feathers, move it from a theme park corridor into the windswept Cretaceous Gobi. Replace the cinematic pack with cautious uncertainty about social behavior. Replace human-like problem-solving with anatomical evidence. Replace monster snarls with a living predator's sensory world. Replace the false scale with a real animal that could have looked almost like an impossible bird with teeth and claws. That transformation is not a downgrade. It is a discovery. It teaches us that dinosaurs were not designed to satisfy our expectations. They were shaped by evolution. Velociraptor did not need to be human-sized to matter. It did not need to open doors to be intelligent enough for its world. It did not need to hunt in packs to be a successful predator. It did not need to be featherless to be frightening. It just needed to survive in its environment. And its fossils show an animal specialized enough to deserve attention without Hollywood inflation. Even the word raptor has been reshaped by pop culture. In paleontology, Velociraptor belongs to Dromaeosauridae, a family that includes animals of different sizes, shapes, and ecologies. Some were small, some were much larger. Some, like Microraptor, had long feathers on arms and legs and may have glided. Some, like Utahraptor, were far bigger than Velociraptor. Deinonychus sits in the middle of the cultural story because it inspired the movie image. But the public often uses raptor as if it means one animal, the Jurassic Park creature. That erases the diversity of the group. A real documentary should restore that diversity. Velociraptor was one dromaeosaur among many, not the master template for all raptors. It was Mongolian, small, feathered, and part of a desert ecosystem. Deinonychus was larger, North American, and historically important in changing dinosaur science. Utahraptor was bigger still. Microraptor complicates everything with wings and possible gliding. When people learn this, the world of raptors becomes bigger, not smaller. The myth collapses, but the science expands. The skull of Velociraptor also deserves attention. It was long and relatively low with a narrow snout, quite different from the blunt, muscular movie faces people often imagine. The teeth were sharp and recurved, useful for gripping and slicing flesh. But the head was not the oversized weapon of a giant predator. Its jaws belonged to an animal adapted for prey appropriate to its size. It was not built like a tyrannosaur. It was not built to crush bone. It was built as a nimble predator in a smaller ecological role. The feet and claws made it visually dramatic. The enlarged second toe claw was held off the ground when walking. preserving its sharpness. This posture is one of those details that makes dromaeosaurs feel so distinctive. But again, we must be careful. The claw was not magic. It was part of a whole predatory system that included balance, forelimbs, jaws, body weight, and behavior. If it used the claw to pin prey, the arms and jaws likely helped control the struggle. Predation is not a single weapon. It is choreography. That choreography may have looked more bird-like than reptilian. Modern birds of prey use feet, talons, wings, body weight, and beaks in coordinated ways. They grip, pin, balance, and feed. Dromaeosaurs were not birds of prey, but comparisons can be useful if handled carefully. They suggest that the famous claw was probably not just a slashing hook, but part of a prey restraint system. The image of Velociraptor jumping onto prey and holding it down with claws while using its jaws may be closer to current thinking than the old image of a dinosaur kickboxing with knife toes. This makes the fighting dinosaurs fossil feel even more important. In that specimen, predator and prey are not separated by imagination. They are physically locked together. It is one of the rare moments when deep time gives us something that feels almost behavioral. We still have to interpret it carefully, but it anchors the animal in reality. Velociraptor was not just a skull in a drawer or a silhouette in a movie. It was an animal that struggled, attacked, and died. Death, in fact, is why we know it at all. Every fossil is the remains of a life that ended and a preservation accident that succeeded. Velociraptor fossils survived in sediments of the Gobi because particular conditions buried bones, protected them, and eventually exposed them to discovery. Paleontology is not a complete library. It is a scattered archive. The real Velociraptor is known through that archive. Skulls, claws, bones, comparisons, and rare exceptional evidence. Scientists reconstruct the animal from pieces, not from a full recording. That is why certainty must be earned. It is easy to say Velociraptor hunted like this, Velociraptor thought like that, or Velociraptor always moved in packs. It is harder and more honest to ask what evidence supports each claim. Size is supported by bone. Feathers are supported by direct quill knob evidence and relatives. Geography is supported by fossil localities. The movie Deinonychus link is supported by the history of Jurassic Park's scientific inspiration. Pack behavior is not strongly supported for Velociraptor. Exact colors are unknown. Vocalizations are unknown. Facial expressions are unknown. Many details of hunting behavior remain inferred, not observed. This does not make the animal less real. It makes the science more careful, and careful science can still be exciting. The real Velociraptor gives us a perfect example of how paleontology changes public imagination. At one point, the public picture of a dinosaur predator was scaly, upright, and reptilian. Then discoveries and reinterpretations made dinosaurs more active. Then feathered dinosaurs changed the image again. Now a scientifically literate reconstruction of Velociraptor must look like something that might have shocked audiences in 1993. Smaller, lower, feathered, bird-like, and still dangerous. The animal did not change. Our evidence and our courage to follow it changed. This is also why the real Velociraptor is a better teaching tool than the movie version. It lets us talk about evolution. It lets us talk about how names and pop culture shape memory. It lets us talk about how fossils preserve some things and not others. It lets us talk about the difference between evidence and speculation. It lets us talk about why smaller does not mean less important. It lets us talk about how science corrects itself without demanding that people stop loving the stories that introduced them to science. That last point matters. Many people became fascinated by dinosaurs because of Jurassic Park. If you tell them the movie was simply wrong and therefore foolish, you lose the emotional bridge that brought them into the subject. A better approach is to say, the movie raptors were brilliant movie creatures, and now the fossils show us a different, equally fascinating animal. One belongs to cinema. One belongs to Cretaceous Mongolia. Understanding the difference gives us both. The real Velociraptor lived in a harsh world. The Gobi of the late Cretaceous was not a tropical theme park. It was a landscape of dunes, dry conditions, and intermittent life around water and vegetation. Protoceratops, oviraptorosaurs, small mammals, lizards, and other animals shared that world. Sandstorms or dune collapses may have helped preserve some fossils. Eggs, nests, and skeletons from the region show an ecosystem far richer than the old desert stereotype suggests. Velociraptor moved through that world as a mid-sized predator, not as an uncontested apex monster. That ecological placement is important. Velociraptor was not the king of dinosaurs. It did not need to be. Ecosystems are not built only from kings. They are built from specialists, scavengers, opportunists, juveniles, eggs, small prey, plants, burrows, seasonal changes, and dangerous encounters. A mid-sized predator can be just as evolutionarily interesting as a giant predator because it lives closer to the daily complexity of an ecosystem. It has to be careful. It can hunt, but it can also be injured. It can threaten smaller animals, but larger animals or dangerous prey can hurt it. The fighting dinosaurs fossil captures that risk perfectly. Predator and prey locked so tightly that neither walks away. This makes Velociraptor less like a movie villain and more like a real carnivore. Real carnivores are not always roaring. They calculate risk without human-like thought. They conserve energy. They avoid unnecessary injury. They scavenge if available. They hunt prey that can be handled. They fail often. They sometimes die trying. If Velociraptor attacked Protoceratops-sized prey, it was entering danger. A beaked muscular herbivore could fight back. The fossil record does not show a clean victory. It shows struggle. That word may be better than monster. Velociraptor was a struggling animal in a struggling world. Its feathers had to be maintained. Its claws could break. Its prey could escape. Its young had to survive. Its species had to reproduce generation after generation in a changing environment. This is natural history. Not a monster designed for applause, but a lineage shaped by survival. So how should we picture it? Picture a small feathered predator moving low across sand and scrub. Its tail is held stiff behind it for balance. Its arms carry feathers. Its hands face inward. Its head is long and narrow. It pauses, alert, using senses we can infer only partly from skull anatomy. It may hunt alone in this moment. It may be aware of others nearby. It may scavenge a carcass if it finds one. It may approach a nesting site, a lizard, a mammal, or a juvenile dinosaur. It does not know it is famous. It does not know a future movie will borrow its name and reshape its identity. It is just alive. That image is quieter than the kitchen scene, but it is also more haunting, because it reminds us that the real past does not need to match our myths to be extraordinary. The real Velociraptor was not designed for humans. It lived tens of millions of years before us. Its world was older, stranger, and more complete than any franchise. When we restore its feathers and shrink it to its real scale, we are not taking away its magic. We are returning it to its own life. The public version of Velociraptor will probably never disappear. It is too iconic. The word raptor has become part of film language. People will keep imagining the door-opening monsters. Toys, games, memes, and sequels will keep the image alive. That is fine. Culture has its own fossils. The movie Raptor is one of them. But science asks us to keep two images in our heads at once. One is the cinematic raptor. Oversized, scaly, terrifying, brilliant in the logic of a thriller. The other is the real Velociraptor. Small, feathered, bird-like, predatory, living in late Cretaceous Central Asia. Known from fossils that tell a more complex story than any monster seen. The second image does not erase the first. It deepens it, because now when you hear the name Velociraptor, you can understand the transformation. You can see how a scientific animal became a movie creature. You can see how a movie creature became the default image in the public mind. You can see how new fossil evidence challenges that image. And you can see how myth-busting is not about ruining wonder. It is about replacing shallow wonder with deeper wonder. The real Velociraptor was not what Jurassic Park told you. It was smaller. It was feathered. It was not the same thing as the movie animal based largely on Deinonychus. It did not have proven wolf-pack hunting behavior. It lived in a different world. But it was not less fascinating. It was more scientifically important, more evolutionarily revealing, and more surprising in the long run. The movie version became famous because it was built for fear. The real animal deserves attention because it was built by evolution. That is the better story. The discovery history itself helps explain why the real animal took time to emerge in public imagination. Velociraptor was named in the early 20th century from fossils found during American Museum of Natural History expeditions in Mongolia. The type material included a skull and claw material, enough to show that this was a swift predatory dinosaur with a distinctive foot weapon. But at that time, the wider picture of small theropods was still very different from what it is today. Dinosaurs were often presented as more reptilian, more sluggish, and less bird-like than modern science suggests. Even when a fossil had dynamic implications, public imagery did not change overnight. Then came Deinonychus. John Ostrom's work on Deinonychus in the 1960s helped change how paleontologists thought about dinosaur activity, metabolism, and the origin of birds. Deinonychus had grasping hands, a stiff tail, and a large sickle claw. It looked like an active predator, not a slow swamp-bound reptile. This animal became one of the engines of the dinosaur renaissance. In a way, when Jurassic Park put Velociraptor on screen, it was borrowing not only a body type closer to Deinonychus, but also decades of scientific excitement about agile, bird-like predatory dinosaurs. That is one reason the movie version felt so convincing at the time. It was not purely fantasy. It was built on a real shift in paleontology. Dinosaurs were no longer dull reptiles. They were active animals. The film amplified that idea. The raptors moved quickly, held their tails off the ground, and felt mentally alive. In the early 1990s, that mattered. For audiences accustomed to older dinosaur imagery, the raptors felt revolutionary. They were wrong in some details, but they were right about one big thing. Dinosaurs were not boring. The problem is that public images freeze faster than scientific images. Once a film becomes iconic, its design can become more powerful than new evidence. A museum can update a velociraptor mount. A paper can describe quill knobs. Paleo artists can paint feathers. But a movie scene seen by millions can remain in the public mind for decades. That is why some people still feel surprised when they hear Velociraptor had feathers, even though feathered dinosaur science has been around for years. Popular culture has inertia. It keeps moving in the direction of the first image that made people care. This is why the Jurassic World films faced a difficult choice. They could update the raptors dramatically and risk breaking visual continuity with the earlier movies, or keep the established design and accept scientific criticism. The franchise mostly chose continuity. From a branding perspective, that makes sense. From a science education perspective, it leaves a gap. Viewers keep seeing velociraptors that look more like descendants of the 1993 design than reconstructions based on modern evidence. But a documentary does not have that limitation. A documentary can say, the movie animal is famous, but the fossil animal is different. It can show both side by side without asking the audience to hate one. The movie raptor belongs in a conversation about storytelling. The real velociraptor belongs in a conversation about anatomy, evolution, and evidence. The intelligence question also needs careful handling. Jurassic Park presents raptors as almost tactical masterminds. They remember, learn, coordinate, and solve problems in ways that make them feel close to human-level antagonists. Real Velociraptor likely had sensory and behavioral abilities appropriate for a predatory dinosaur, but we cannot turn it into a genius because a movie needed suspense. Brain size relative to body, skull anatomy, and comparisons with related animals can suggest certain capabilities. But they do not let us write a script for its thoughts. The safest statement is that Velociraptor was likely alert, active, and behaviorally complex in ways we cannot fully reconstruct. But the super-intelligent movie raptor is fiction. The same caution applies to sounds. The screen raptors screech, bark, hiss, and communicate in ways designed for tension. Real velociraptor vocalizations are unknown, because birds and crocodilians are the closest living relatives of non-avian dinosaurs. Scientists can make broad evolutionary inferences about possible sound-producing structures in dinosaurs generally, but we do not have a velociraptor recording. It may have produced calls, hisses, low sounds, or other vocalizations, but specific sounds in movies are artistic choices. The real animal's soundscape is one of those gaps the fossil record has not closed. The face is another hidden myth. Dinosaurs often snarl like mammals, pulling lips back to display teeth. Real theropod soft tissue is a complicated topic, and reconstructions continue to debate lips, gums, scales, feathers, and facial tissues in different groups. For Velociraptor, the safest approach is to avoid giving it a mammal-like monster face. It was not a wolf in reptile makeup. It was a feathered theropod with a skull and soft tissues we can partially infer but not fully know. A realistic reconstruction should feel animal-like, not villain-like. The hands matter too. The public often imagines raptors with grabbing, twisted wrists and grasping monster hands reaching forward. But theropod wrist anatomy limits that posture. The palms faced inward. This may seem like a small technical detail, but it changes the whole feel of the animal. With inward-facing hands and feathered arms, Velociraptor looks closer to the bird side of the dinosaur family tree. It also reminds us that movie creatures are often designed for human readability. Hands facing downward look more familiar to us. Inward-facing feathered arms look stranger, but they are closer to the biology. Even its tail tells a story. A stiffened tail is not just a tail. It is a balancing system. For an agile bipedal predator, balance matters during running, turning, lunging, and struggling with prey. The movie raptors often use their tails in ways that look dynamic, but the real tail was a structural part of the animal's locomotion. It stretched back as a counterbalance, helping hold the body level. Combined with the low body posture, the tail makes real Velociraptor look less upright and more like an arrow-shaped animal built around balance and control. The environment also changes the colors we imagine. We do not know Velociraptor's coloration, but if we reconstruct it as a Cretaceous goby animal, we can think in terms of camouflage, display, and feather patterning. It might have had sandy browns, grays, rust tones, stripes, bars, or display patches. It might have looked plain, or surprisingly patterned. Without direct pigment evidence, we cannot know. But we can say this: it was almost certainly not required to look like a green-gray movie reptile. A feathered desert predator gives paleo artists much richer possibilities. That is one of the joys of modern paleontology. It does not just correct, it expands imagination. At first, a child may feel disappointed to learn that Velociraptor was not the huge movie killer. But if the explanation stops there, the teacher has failed. The next step is to show what replaces the myth. A feathered raptor crouching in the goby, arms covered in veined feathers, tail rigid, claw raised, eyes fixed on prey, is an extraordinary image. It is not famous because of Hollywood, but it deserves to be famous because it shows evolution doing something beautiful and strange. The real Velociraptor also teaches us how names can mislead. In everyday speech, raptor means a dinosaur like the movie creature. In biology, raptor can refer to birds of prey, while dromaeosaurids are the dinosaur group people usually mean when they say raptor. A velociraptor itself means something like swift robber or swift thief, a name based on the idea of a fast predatory animal. Names carry stories, but they do not always carry precision. When a movie chooses one name for a body inspired by another genus, that name becomes a cultural fossil of its own. This is why clear language matters. If we say the Jurassic Park raptors were not Velociraptor, that is catchy but slightly blunt. The more accurate version is that the animals called Velociraptor in the franchise were much larger than real Velociraptor and were strongly influenced by Deinonychus and broader Dromaeosaur science. That sentence is longer, but it is fairer. It does not accuse the filmmakers of randomly inventing everything. It explains how a scientific idea traveled into fiction and changed along the way. The hunting question deserves the same careful language. We can say Velociraptor was a predator. We can say it had teeth and claws. We can say the fighting dinosaur's fossil shows close combat with Protoceratops. We can say its sickle claw was likely used in predation, possibly for gripping or pinning. We can say coordinated pack hunting like the movies is not demonstrated by strong fossil evidence. We should not say it definitely never cooperated with others, because behavior is difficult to rule out completely. This balance is what separates science storytelling from internet myth-busting. The best myth-busting does not replace one cartoon with another. It replaces overconfidence with curiosity. So the real Velociraptor is not the giant pack hunter from the movies, but it is also not a punchline. It was not an oversized reptilian villain. It was not a harmless bird. It was a small feathered theropod predator in a complex ecosystem, with anatomy that connects dinosaurs to birds and fossils that reveal flashes of behavior. That is enough. More than enough. There is also a philosophical reason this animal matters. Velociraptor shows how hard it is for the public to let go of a powerful image. Once people have seen something vividly, the mind treats it almost like memory. Even when you learn the facts, the movie shape may still appear first. You hear Velociraptor, and the kitchen door opens in your imagination. Science has to work against that emotional memory. It has to build a new image strong enough to stand beside the old one. That is why documentaries need rhythm and contrast. Do not simply state that Velociraptor was smaller. Let the audience feel the difference. Show the movie giant in silhouette, then show the real animal lower to the ground. Do not simply state that it had feathers. Explain the quill knobs, the evolutionary relatives, the bird connection. Do not simply say it did not hunt in packs. Explain how behavior is inferred and why evidence matters. Do not simply say Jurassic Park was wrong. Explain why it was culturally right in one way and scientifically outdated in another. That is how you keep the wonder alive. Because the deeper truth is that Velociraptor became famous for the wrong image, but remains interesting for the right reasons. The wrong image brought people to the door. The right reasons invite them inside. Imagine ending not with a correction, but with a restoration. The camera leaves the movie kitchen. The stainless steel fades. The artificial lights go out. The sound of claws on tile disappears. We move backward through the name, through the franchise, through the novel, through Deinonychus and the dinosaur renaissance, through Mongolian expeditions, through skulls and claws, through feather evidence, until we arrive at a dry Cretaceous landscape. There, the real Velociraptor moves through dust and low vegetation. It is not tall enough to tower over a person. It is not naked and scaly. It is not plotting like a movie villain. It is feathered, alert, balanced, alive. It pauses. For a second, the animal is not a myth to correct. It is a life to understand. That is the point of the whole story. Jurassic Park changed Velociraptor forever in public imagination. Science changes it back, not by making it smaller in meaning, but by making it truer. And sometimes the truer animal is the stranger one. The real Velociraptor did not need to be a monster. It was already a dinosaur worth meeting. That is why the corrected version should not feel like a downgrade. The real animal gives us feathers, desert ecosystems, evolutionary history, predatory anatomy, fossil uncertainty, and one of the best examples of how a movie name can overpower a scientific animal. The correction is the adventure.